Agnes Moorehead was already a Hollywood powerhouse by the time a little sitcom called Bewitched came knocking. But what most fans don't realize is that behind one of TV's most beloved characters was an actress who wanted absolutely nothing to do with the role that ended up defining her. When producers first approached her about playing Endora, Agnes shut it down on the spot. It wasn't her style, it didn't fit her vision, and it definitely wasn't the kind of career move she pictured for herself. But then one unexpected meeting pulled her right back into the conversation and into a commitment she never really embraced. What came next was almost a decade of hit episodes, backstage friction, and a performance adored by millions, even though Agnes felt very differently. Agnes Moorehead entered the world on December 6, 1900, born Agnes Robertson Moorehead to two parents who were strikingly different yet equally influential. Her father, John Henderson Moorehead, served as a Presbyterian clergyman, and her mother, Mary Moorehead, was a gifted singer. Mary was just 17 when Agnes was born, still young, still full of her own artistic ambition, and she passed that same spark directly into her children. Creativity wasn't just encouraged in the Moorehead home, it thrived. From the very beginning, it was clear that the stage had plans for Agnes. Her first performance happened when she was only 3 years old, standing before her father's congregation reciting the Lord's Prayer. It was a tiny moment, but it planted two seeds that would shape her life forever: her devotion to faith and her calling to perform. Years later, both of those passions would grow into something much deeper and far more complicated. When the family relocated to St. Louis, Missouri, her love for performance only intensified. Agnes and her younger sister Peggy had extraordinary imaginations, and they entertained themselves endlessly, often by mimicking the people who filled their father's church pews. Her first public performance beyond recitation came when she sang "The Lord is My Shepherd" as a soloist, accompanied by her mother at the organ. It wasn't fame, it wasn't Broadway, but it was applause, attention, and recognition, and Agnes wanted more. Her mother nurtured that hunger every step of the way. She would look at Agnes and ask, "Who are you today?" Every day became a new character, a new expression, a new performance. Peggy often played right beside her, and both girls would show up at the dinner table fully in character, leaving their parents more amused than annoyed. Even her older sister Ruth cheered her on, recognizing early that Agnes was reaching for something bigger than childhood games. But their home wasn't all imagination and laughter. Discipline belonged to her father, and his methods were often harsh. Even though he enjoyed her performances, he didn't let theatrics excuse misbehavior. When Agnes crossed the line, he would sit her on a stack of encyclopedias and make her memorize a psalm. She later admitted the punishment was surprisingly effective. It strengthened her memory, sharpened her discipline, and taught her to think before acting. In an unexpected way, even her consequences fed her talent. That structure didn't suppress her ambition, it sharpened it. Agnes pursued her education with the same passion she gave to the stage. In 1923, she graduated from Muskingum College in New Concord, Ohio, majoring in biology while still performing in college plays. She pushed even further and eventually earned a master's degree in English and public speaking, all while working as a public school teacher. Her life became a balancing act of scholarship and performance, each demanding more energy than she seemed to have, but she never stopped moving forward. Armed with degrees, training, and determination, she stepped into the world of professional performance, taking on understudy roles and ensemble work in Broadway productions like Scarlet Pages, All the King's Horses, and Soldiers and Women. She was working, but the success she wanted still felt just out of reach. Then everything changed. The Great Depression swept across the country, shuttering theaters and halting productions. For performers like Agnes, opportunities vanished almost overnight. Work became scarce, competition increased, and survival replaced ambition as the priority. But Agnes didn't fold. She adapted. Her gift for imitation opened a new door when Time Inc. hired her to voice famous women in their newsreel series, A March of Time. She became the Duchess of Windsor, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, Eleanor Roosevelt. Voices of power and history delivered through her talent alone. It wasn't the stage, and it certainly wasn't Broadway stardom, but it fine-tuned the skill that would later define her: command of voice. Even so, life was far from glamorous. Stage work came rarely, money was scarce, and she once confessed to going 4 entire days without food. It was survival, pure and simple. But that struggle didn't break her. Instead, it pushed her toward what would become her true breakthrough. A radio station finally offered her a regular position, and her schedule exploded. Some days she performed on several programs back-to-back, shifting character and tone with almost mechanical precision. The pace was intense, but Agnes recognized what this period was giving her. Every script, every voice, every broadcast strengthened her range and stamina. Those long days behind the microphone became the foundation of the legendary career she would eventually build. By 1930, Agnes was stepping into a new chapter of her life: marriage. On June 5th, she wed fellow actor John Griffith Lee, a union that would remain surprisingly private despite Agnes's growing visibility in the entertainment world. They kept themselves out of headlines, out of gossip columns, and away from the public lens. But the few details that did surface hinted at a complicated marriage beneath the calm exterior. John struggled in his acting career while Agnes slowly accelerated in hers. He eventually enlisted in World War II in search of steady work, and as her success continued rising, resentment began to grow. At one point, he reportedly referred to his wife as a meal ticket, a sharp, painful comment that lingered like a crack in the foundation of their marriage. It wasn't the last time her career created tension in her personal life. Still, the two stayed together for nearly 20 years before officially divorcing on June 11, 1952. And during that long stretch, Agnes often traveled for work, but she always seemed eager to return to their family farm and the quiet life that waited there. In 1951, they even fostered a young boy named Sean Lee. On paper, it looked like the beginning of a new, tender chapter. In reality, it became the center of one of the most complicated and emotional relationships in Agnes Moorehead's life. Sean wanted love, attention, presence. Agnes seemed overwhelmed by the role of mother, torn between nurturing a child and maintaining the career she had built from nothing. Over time, her expectations for Sean and his inability to meet them created a growing divide. She hoped to raise him with deep Christian values, the same faith that shaped her entire upbringing, her identity, her worldview. But Sean did not grow into the conservative Christian she imagined. According to biographer Jeffrey Mark, that difference sparked frustration, disappointment, even distance. Eventually, he writes, Agnes shut him out entirely. From Sean's perspective, the situation had cracks from the beginning. Those who knew the family recalled a boy who struggled with abandonment and insecurity, traits that sometimes surfaced as possessiveness or rebellious behavior. A family employee remembered Sean wanting Agnes to himself, clinging hard to what little connection he felt. At school, the insecurity showed up in smaller ways: bossiness over toys, food, space, all of it driven by fear of not being enough. As he got older, the rebellion many teenagers moved through became more pronounced. His hair grew long, his clothes shifted into styles Agnes disapproved of, and his music choices strayed from what she valued. Every new step toward independence felt like a step away from the woman raising him, and the tension only increased. The breaking point came in a fierce argument that led Sean to run away, something he had done before, once fleeing school in Europe and resurfacing in Beverly Hills to live with Agnes. This time, he was gone for 3 weeks. When he returned, his hair was longer than ever. Agnes allowed him back under one condition. He cut it. He agreed, but the compromise didn't heal the rift. She criticized his clothes, his friends, his influences, convinced outside forces were pulling him away from everything she believed mattered. Eventually, unable to accept the man he was becoming, she severed the relationship entirely. She disowned him. For a woman so devoted to Christianity, the decision was striking. Her biographer once described her as a consummate professional on set, disciplined, focused, impeccable. But when reflecting on her relationship with Sean, he said the fracture revealed a part of her character shaped by faith, yet hardened by it. A heart deep in devotion but tight against difference. A painful truth for both mother and son, and a wound neither ever truly resolved. But even during this turmoil, life outside the home was shifting in extraordinary ways. Years earlier, in the 1920s, a young Agnes crossed paths with someone who would permanently alter the course of her career: Orson Welles. He was barely 7 at the time. More than a decade later, in 1937, she joined his Mercury Players, an independent theater company that became the crucible for a new era of performance. Their bond would stretch across theater, radio, and film. When Orson released Citizen Kane in 1941, his first monumental cinematic triumph, Agnes was right there with him. The film introduced her to Hollywood on a grand scale, and the industry took notice. A year later, she starred in his follow-up, The Magnificent Ambersons. Her performance earned her a New York Film Critics Award and an Academy Award nomination, solidifying what many already knew. She was an undeniable force. Writer Jeffrey Mark once explained it best. Agnes, he said, had the talent to lead any film, yet she rarely played the star. She didn't need the top billing. When she appeared on screen, she took ownership of it, stealing the attention, the energy, the room without demanding the spotlight. And this was only the first wave of her rise. Now, 1954 lands Agnes at another turning point in her life. 2 years after her split from John Griffith Lee, she walked into a second marriage, and this one stirred up Hollywood far more than her first ever did. Her new husband was actor Robert Gist, 17 years younger, handsome, charming, and instantly a conversation piece. In an industry where perception was everything, that age gap alone had people talking. But rumors of Robert's infidelity pushed the story even further into scandal territory. With so much tension and gossip swirling around them, their marriage was almost doomed from the start. 4 years later, in 1958, they divorced, and that chapter of Agnes's personal life came to an end. After Robert, she never entered another long-term romantic relationship. Many believe that the questions surrounding her private life, especially her sexuality, played a part in that. Hollywood has always been difficult for anyone trying to live outside the expectations of the norm. For a respected and established actress like Agnes Moorehead, living openly, if she had ever wanted to, could have cost her everything. She guarded her privacy fiercely, almost obsessively. But Hollywood sets run on whispers, and people who worked beside her noticed the closeness she shared with certain women. Studios continued presenting her as the ideal housewife and mother figure, traditional, conservative, pure, but behind the curtain, her identity was something the industry couldn't stop speculating about. Some journalists even suggested outright that Agnes might have been a Actor and comedian Paul Lynde made the boldest claim of all. He didn't just imply a relationship between Agnes and Debbie Reynolds, he declared it common knowledge, even calling Agnes one of the all-time Hollywood lesbians. Others agreed that she had what were called romantic friendships with women, though she carried herself quietly, cautiously, never leaving more evidence than a soft rumor or lingering gaze. Of course, not everyone accepted the claims. Debbie Reynolds denied any romantic involvement and even argued that Agnes was so reserved and old-fashioned she wouldn't understand the term lesbian at all. Yet her concerns surfaced later, when Debbie's ex-husband Eddie Fisher prepared to write about their friendship in his autobiography. She reportedly threatened legal action to prevent certain details from being revealed. Whether that was protection or fear, no one ever truly knew, but it certainly reignited suspicion. Paul, a consistent supplier of Hollywood gossip, told more stories, some impossible to verify, some strangely persistent. According to him, early in her career, Agnes had many intimate female partners, and the industry worked hard to mask it. He even recalled an explosive argument between Agnes and one of her husbands, where she allegedly snapped that if he was free to see women outside the marriage, she could do the same. True or not, accusations like that leave a long shadow. Years later, writer Bose Hadley asked Agnes directly about her sexuality. She didn't confirm, and she didn't deny. Instead, she sidestepped with sharp humor, suggesting she wouldn't mind being grouped with actors rumored to be queer, even if she didn't belong there. A response like that only deepened curiosity. Sometimes silence, or something close to it, becomes its own kind of confession. Elsa Lanchester added more weight to the speculation. Married to openly gay actor Charles Laughton, who had even starred with Agnes, she claimed Agnes maintained romantic relationships with women, always with extreme discretion, maybe even more caution than necessary. Between Elsa's comments, Paul's gossip, and the patterns in Agnes's personal life, the truth became something people believed without ever having proof. While the speculation continued quietly behind closed doors, Agnes's career roared forward. She worked relentlessly, disappearing into her roles with a commitment that impressed even the most hardened critics. Through the 1950s and 1960s, she appeared everywhere: lead roles, supporting parts, dramatic features, lighthearted films. Her face became familiar, her voice distinctive, her presence unmistakable. Then came the film that changed everything. In 1956, she appeared in The Conqueror, a production now remembered not for its story, but for the tragedy that followed those who helped bring it to life. The film was shot 2 years earlier, in the summer of 1954, near St. George, Utah, a region chosen for its dramatic red cliffs and sweeping white dunes, perfect stand-ins for the Asian steppes. What no one realized was that this picturesque stretch of desert sat roughly 137 miles from the Nevada atomic testing site at Yucca Flat. The government reassured the public repeatedly: no danger, no risk, nothing to fear from the nuclear tests. But the truth was far darker. Though no bombs were detonated during the actual filming period, 11 tests had taken place the year before. 2 of them, especially, were devastatingly radioactive. The blast, codenamed Harry, measured 32.4 kilotons, and Simon reached 51.5, both far more powerful than the 13-kiloton bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Dr. Pendleton, a former researcher for the Atomic Energy Commission, later explained that fallout from the bomb tests stayed dangerously active more than a year later. The isotopes, strontium-90, cesium-137, would have barely diminished by the time filming began, and canyon terrain traps radiation like a bowl holding water. The cast and crew walked straight into an invisible storm. 220 people worked on The Conqueror. 91 later developed cancer. 46 died. For Agnes's mother, the connection felt painfully clear. This film, this one project, seemed to mark the beginning of the end for her daughter. But we'll get into Agnes's final years and that heartbreaking chapter later in the video. Now, Agnes stepped into a new era of her career in 1964, when she was offered a part on a small, lighthearted sitcom that would unexpectedly define her legacy. That show was Bewitched. Though her path to playing the unforgettable Endora was not a smooth or straightforward climb. In fact, when the role was first presented to her, Agnes wanted nothing to do with it. Endora, Samantha's fiery mother who loathed mortals just as much as she loved meddling in their lives, wasn't a character Agnes took seriously. She declined the offer without hesitation and expected never to hear about the sitcom again. But fate had different plans. A chance encounter with Elizabeth Montgomery, the actress set to lead the series, and Elizabeth's husband, Bill, changed everything. During their conversation, the couple casually mentioned that they were still struggling to find the perfect actress to bring Endora to life. So they asked her again, one more time, if she would consider stepping into the role. Agnes responded with her signature mix of caution and wit, neither committing nor refusing outright. But when the pilot was officially ready to move forward, she agreed, and in doing so, stepped into one of television's most beloved characters. Bewitched followed the story of Samantha, a charming witch played by Montgomery, who tried to live a normal life after falling in love with and marrying a mortal man. Her husband, Darren Stevens, portrayed first by Dick York and later by Dick Sargent, wanted an everyday life, a stable home, and no magic. Samantha tried to honor that, but her powers always seemed to surface at the most inconvenient moments. Whether she intended to fix a problem or spice up her day, her magic often led to chaos instead. And through it all, Endora hovered above the story like a colorful storm cloud, dramatic, disapproving, clever, and always ready with a quip sharper than a blade. Ironically, despite Bewitched becoming a cultural phenomenon, Agnes never expected the show to last. When she joined the cast, she predicted it would fade after one season and even disliked the pilot. To her, the scripts felt cheap, the material beneath her. She famously called them hack work. She was contractually locked in, so she continued performing, though her passion remained elsewhere. The show would ultimately run nearly a decade, with Agnes appearing in most episodes and winning 6 Emmys along the way. Yet she never wanted to be remembered solely as the witch in green eyeshadow. She reminded people often that she had been a respected actress long before Bewitched and refused to let Endora define her entirely. Her time on set came with mixed relationships. She adored Elizabeth Montgomery, speaking warmly of her both publicly and privately. But her relationship with Dick York, the original Darren, was tense and often strained. And when York left the show and was replaced by Dick Sargent, the transition only made matters more complicated. At the first table read with Sargent, Moorehead reportedly stood up and announced that she was not fond of change. The discomfort lingered, and during a trip to Salem, David White, who played Larry Tate, found Sargent in tears after something Agnes had said cut deeper than she realized. Time softened things. Sargent later spoke about her with respect, calling her the most professional woman he ever worked with. The two eventually formed a genuine friendship, and Agnes even began inviting him to her annual Christmas birthday celebrations. Whatever rocky ground existed between them early on eventually leveled into something kinder. Outside the studio walls, Agnes's personal life shifted dramatically during the middle years of Bewitched. Her foster son Sean graduated high school and was expected to follow her footsteps into academia. University, career, structure, that was her vision for him. But Sean dreamed differently. The moment his diploma was in hand, he packed his things and left in search of a life far beyond her shadow. That departure would be permanent. Agnes never saw him again, not even as her health declined in the years that followed. Despite her grief and the fact that her love for Bewitched was fading, Agnes never slowed down. She kept working with that same fierce energy everyone knew her for. Even as her health started to slip, her passion for performing didn't. She took on more film roles, went on a Broadway tour, and even dipped into voice acting for the first time. One of her final roles was voicing Goose in the 1973 animated classic Charlotte's Web. But no one knew that, just as she was still pushing forward, her life was about to take a heartbreaking turn. At the time, she was fully committed to the Broadway production of Gigi, taking on the role of Aunt Alicia. A musical of that scale demanded endurance, voice, movement, and constant rehearsal. Yet Agnes handled it with the determination she was known for. She threw herself into the big ensemble numbers, stepped on stage with her usual presence, and tried to maintain her pace, even as her body began to fail her. Eventually, her health declined so sharply that she could no longer perform, and a replacement had to be brought in. For someone as disciplined and devoted to her craft as Agnes, stepping away wasn't just difficult, it was devastating. Doctors soon uncovered the reason behind her sudden decline. She was diagnosed with uterine cancer, and the disease had already spread to her lungs. The news placed her squarely among the growing list of cast and crew from The Conqueror who were developing cancer, an eerie pattern that could no longer be ignored. Years earlier, she had mentioned disturbing whispers about the film's Utah shooting location to her close friend Sandra Gould. She had even looked back at a photograph from that set and noticed something chilling. Every person in that picture had eventually fallen ill and died. Whether coincidence or consequence, it was impossible to separate her diagnosis from that haunting production. As the illness progressed, Agnes entered what would become the final chapter of her life. Debbie Reynolds later recalled that despite everything, Agnes remained fierce and hopeful, insisting that she would survive and leaving the outcome in God's hands. She received treatment at Methodist Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, and letters of support poured in from fans, peers, and admirers. Yet one name was painfully absent: her adopted son, Sean. They had not seen one another since his graduation, and even in the face of death, she refused to let Debbie try to find him. The subject hurt too deeply. She closed that door for good. Agnes never saw him again. After a quiet but courageous fight against her illness at the Mayo Clinic, Agnes Moorehead passed away on April 30, 1974. She was 73 years old.